Hey guys, tonight we dive into the shadowy world of medieval sin eaters, those forgotten souls who gobbled up the misdeeds of the dead so the departed could slip into heaven without a backpack full of regrets. Imagine yourself huddled in a dim, thatched cottage as the wind howls outside, the scent of stale bread and bitter ale hanging heavy in the air, while a cloaked figure leans over a lifeless body, whispering incantations that make your skin prickle. You feel the chill of the stone floor seeping through your shoes, hear the crackle of a dying fire, and taste the metallic tang of fear on your tongue as you watch this eerie ritual unfold. You probably won't believe how these outcasts turned a loaf of bread into a ticket to damnation for themselves, all to spare others the eternal flames. So before you continue listening to my story, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I know you're still listening along with me. You step back in time, your boots sinking into the muddy paths of a medieval village, where the air buzzes with the low hum of daily life, blacksmiths hammering away, children chasing geese, and the distant toll of a church bell calling the faithful to prayer. But beneath this everyday rhythm lurks a deeper dread, one that grips the hearts of everyone from the lowliest serf to the mightiest lord. The fear of sin and what it means for the soul after death. You sense it in the whispered conversations at the market, in the way eyes dart toward the graveyard on the hill, where fresh mounds of earth remind you that judgment awaits us all. In this world shaped by the iron grip of the church, sin isn't just a personal slip-up, it's a stain that could drag your eternal spirit into the abyss. And that's where the sin eaters come in, emerging from the fringes like ghosts at twilight, ready to shoulder the burden that no one else dares touch. You wander deeper into the origins of this peculiar practice, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down as you uncover how it all began. Picture yourself in the misty dawn of the Middle Ages, around the 5th to 15th centuries, when Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms still echoing with the ghosts of ancient pagan ways. The mainstream historical fact here is that medieval society was obsessed with the concept of purgatory, a place Le Goff describes as a fiery limbo where souls atoned for their venial sins before ascending to paradise, a belief that solidified in the 12th century, turning death into a high-stakes negotiation with the divine. You can almost hear the priests intoning Latin masses, their voices echoing off stone cathedral walls, warning that unconfessed transgressions could trap a soul in torment for eons. But folks didn't always wait for official absolution. They turned to older, earthier rituals to hedge their bets. As you delve further, you stumble upon the quirky tidbit that sin eating might have drawn from bizarre symbolic acts, like placing bread on a corpse to soak up evil spirits, a custom whispered about in remote Welsh valleys, where the line between life and death felt as thin as a veil of fog. Imagine that your grandma's fresh-baked loaf turning into a sin sponge. It's like the medieval version of a detox cleanse, but instead of kale smoothies, it's crusty bread absorbing your lifetime of fibs and feasts. You chuckle softly at the thought, because honestly, if eating carbs could erase my bad decisions, I'd be a saint by now. But seriously, this fringe element hints at how desperate people were, blending the sacred with the strange in a bid for peace. You pause in a shadowy grove, the leaves rustling like secrets being shared, as you ponder the blend of pagan rituals and Christian doctrine that birthed the sin eater. Long before Christianity swept across the continent, pagan tribes in Celtic lands held beliefs in scapegoats, animals, or even humans who carried away a community's ills. You envision druidic ceremonies under ancient oaks, where offerings of food transferred curses to the wild, the smoke from sacrificial fires curling upward like pleas to forgotten gods. Then came the church, with its crosses and commandments, stamping out these old ways, but not entirely erasing them. Instead, they morphed, twisting into something new, the sin eater, a living vessel for sins. Echoing the biblical scapegoat from Leviticus, where a goat bore the iniquities of the people into the wilderness. You feel the tension in the air, the clash of worlds, as Christianity's emphasis on confession and redemption collided with lingering pagan fears of restless spirits. with a gentle sarcasm in your mind's voice. You think, ah, the Middle Age where faith met folklore in an awkward dance, kind of like trying to mix oil and holy water. One light joke bubbles up. If sin eaters were around today, they'd probably have a Yelp review like 5 stars, cleared my ancestors' karma. But now I'm bloated from all that gluten-free guilt. You smile faintly, the ASMR whisper of your thoughts lulling you deeper into the narrative. But scholars debate openly whether this practice truly flourished in the medieval era or bloomed later, in the 17th century, as documented by early writers like John Aubrey. Was it a widespread custom hidden in the oral traditions of isolated villages, or just a rare eccentricity amplified by time? Le Goff's exploration of medieval mentalities suggests a society ripe for such hybrids, where the fear of hell fueled innovative ways to cheat the system. But the exact timeline remains a foggy, scholarly puzzle, inviting endless cups of tea and heated discussions among historians. You continue your journey, the scent of damp earth and wild herbs filling your nostrils, as you trace how these roots took hold. In the turbulent years following the fall of Rome, as barbarian invasions reshaped Europe, pagan customs clung stubbornly to the edges of Christian conversion. You see villagers in thatched huts, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight, sharing tales of ancestors who appeased the gods with feasts for the dead. Christianity arrived like a stern parent, preaching salvation through the church alone, yet people couldn't shake the old magic. Sin-eating emerged as a compromise, a ritual where a poor sulafin, a beggar or wanderer, consumed bread and ale passed over the corpse, symbolically devouring the deceased misdeeds. You taste the bitterness of the ale in your imagination, feel the crumbly texture of the bread, and wonder at the faith that made it real. Modern aside, it's wild to think that in our era of therapy apps and self-help books, medieval folks outsourced their guilt to a professional eater. Talk about emotional eating taken to extremes. Another light joke slips in. Sin eaters were basically the original Ghostbusters, but instead of proton packs, they used picnic baskets. You relax into the cadence, your eyelids growing heavy as the story unfolds like a soft blanket. The practice spread quietly through rural areas, especially in Wales and the English borders, where Celtic influences lingered strongest. You hear the soft patter of rain on thatch roof, smell the peat smoke from hearth fires, and sense the community's quiet reliance on these shadowy figures. As you near the end of this delve, you reflect on how this fusion created a role both vital and vilified. The sin-eater, born from pagan echoes and Christian anxieties, became a bridge between worlds, absorbing what others feared to carry. But all the irony with each bite, they damned themselves further, a tragic twist in the human quest for purity. You feel a sleepy calm settling in, the narrative gliding onward like a river in the night, carrying you toward the next layer of this haunting tale. You drift along that nocturnal river, the gentle current pulling you into the heart of a somber gathering, where the air thickens with the scent of wilting flowers and fresh-turned sorrel. Flickering torchlight dances on the faces of mourners clustered around a simple wooden bier, their whispers blending with the soft rustle of black woolen cloaks. In this moment, you become a silent observer at the edge of the crowd, your breath catching as the sin-eater steps forward, a gaunt figure shrouded in rags, eyes hollow from years of unspoken burdens. This is their domain, the funeral rite where death's shadow looms largest, and you feel the weight of expectation pressing down like a leaden sky. The family of the departed, faces etched with grief and quiet desperation, extend a trembling hand holding a loaf of coarse bread and a mug of frothy ale, symbols of the feast that will seal the soul's fate. You lean in closer, the chill of the evening mist brushing your skin, as you witness the sin-eater's solemn duty unfold with a ritual precision born of necessity. They approach the corpse, laid out on the bier with coins on its eyes to pay the ferryman of old myths, and begin the incantation, a low murmur that sends shivers up your spine. Words half forgotten from ancient tongues mixed with pleas for mercy. The mainstream historical fact embedded in this scene is the medieval Church's emphasis on last rites, where anointing the dying with oil and hearing confessions was standard practice by the 13th century, as Le Goff notes in his Chronicle of the Earth's spiritual landscape, ensuring the soul's preparation for judgment. Yet, when death came too swiftly or sins went unconfessed, the sin-eater filled the void, a folk remedy for the gaps in official salvation. As the bread is placed upon the chest of the deceased, you watch it rise and fall with an imagined breath, as if the body itself exhales its final transgressions into the dough. The sin-eater then lifts it, crumbling pieces into their mouth, each bite a deliberate act of absorption, the crumbs catching in their beard like captured secrets. You taste the dryness on your own tongue, feel the ale's bitter warmth as they drink deeply from the mug passed over the corpse, swallowing not just sustenance, but the weight of lies, thefts, and unspoken envies that plague the dead in life. It's a ritualistic feast, sparse and symbolic, yet laden with the community's collective relief. Better this outcast bear the load than risk a haunted grave or a soul's eternal wanderings. A quirky tidbit emerges from the shadows of history. In some accounts from Welsh borderlands, the sin-eater might also consume salt sprinkled on the body, believed to draw out particularly stubborn sins like a mystical magnet, leaving the eater with a parched throat and a soul seasoned with extra damnation. Imagine that salt essence seasoning. It's like the medieval equivalent of adding hot sauce to your regrets, making them even harder to swallow. You let out a soft, sarcastic chuckle in your mind, thinking, well, if absorbing sins came with a side of pretzels, at least it'd be a crunchy kind of curse. But the first light joke floats by. Sin-eaters were the original clean-up crew at parties, except the party was a funeral, and the mess was your neighbor's lifetime of mischief. You sense the eerie intimacy of it all, the sin-eaters' hands hovering like reluctant healers, their presence both reviled and revered. The family watches with averted eyes, murmuring thanks under their breath, for this act ensures the departed's transgressions don't cling like burrs to the living, potentially cursing crops or livestock with bad luck. In the flickering light, you see the eater's face contort slightly with each swallow, as if the flavors of sin-bitter jealousy, sour deceit manifest on their palate. Modern aside, in our world of calorie tracking apps, these folks were logging spiritual calories, racking up a deficit that no diet could fix. It's oddly relatable, isn't it? We all carry invisible weights, but they made it literal, one morsel at a time. The ceremony peaks as the sin-eater utters a final prayer, their voice a whispery ASMR lullaby that soothes even as it unsettles. I give easement and rest now to thee, dear one, that ye walk not over fields nor down lanes, and for that peace I pawn my own soul. You feel the words wrap around you like a warm blanket tinged with frost, the cadence slow and hypnotic, drawing you deeper into drowsiness. This pledge, a binding contract with the unseen, transfers the sins wholly, allowing the soul to ascend unburdened while the eater descends further into isolation. Another light joke whispers through. If sin-eating were a job today, the benefits package would include eternal job security but zero vacation days. Since death never takes a break, scholars debate openly whether this role stemmed purely from economic desperation, with sin-eaters often being the poorest beggars paid a pittance for their service, or if it held a deeper shamanistic echo from pre-Christian times, challenging the Church's monopoly on forgiveness. Was it a subversive act of folk empowerment, or merely a superstition tolerated in remote hamlets? Le Goff's insights into medieval piety suggest a society where such practices coexisted uneasily with orthodoxy, but the exact motivations remain a tantalizing puzzle, fodder for late-night academic musings over dusty tongues. You linger at the funeral's edge, the mourners dispersing like smoke, leaving the sin-eater alone with the empty plate and the heavy silence. Their duty done, they slip away into the night, belly full but spirit heavier, the absorbed sins nesting like unwelcome guests in their core. The second light joke tiptoes in. Absorbing sins sounds like a bad buffet choicer. It's all you can eat, but the heartburn lasts forever. You relax further, the sensory details fading into a cozy haze. The fading torchlight, the earthy aroma of the grave, the distant hoot of an owl signaling the right's end. This role, so pivotal yet peripheral, binds the community in a web of shared secrecy, a callback to the pagan-Christian fusion you explored earlier, where fear of the afterlife drove innovation in the most humble of ways. As the stars wheel overhead, you feel the narrative's gentle pull onward, the sin-eater's silhouette merging with the darkness, a reminder that in this medieval tapestry, every thread of sin finds its weaver. The sleepy cadence envelops you, senses lengthening like yawns, carrying the tale's quiet momentum into unseen depths. You follow that fading silhouette through the inky veil of night, your footsteps silent on the dew-kissed grass. As the sin-eater retreats to the fringes of the village, a ramshackle hut perched like a forgotten sentinel on the edge of the woods. The air grows cooler here, laced with the earthy musk of moss and decaying leaves, and you hear the distant croak of frogs harmonizing with the rustle of nocturnal creatures stirring in the underbrush. This is their sanctuary, if you can call it that, a place where solitude wraps around them like a threadbare cloak, shielding yet suffocating. Dawn creeps in slowly, painting the sky in hesitant grays, and you settle into the rhythm of their daily life, an existence balanced on the knife's edge between necessity and oblivion, where every sunrise brings the quiet dread of what burdens the next call might bring. You rise with them in the dim light filtering through cracked shutters, your muscles aching from an imagined night of restless dreams haunted by the echoes of swallowed sins. Their mornings unfold in quiet isolation, a pot of thin gruel bubbling over a meager fire, the steam carrying hints of herbs foraged from the wild, perhaps, to soothe a stomach twisted by more than hunger. You watch as they mend their tattered garments with needle and thread, fingers calloused from years of this thankless toil, the fabric packed so many times it's a map of survival. Society shuns them, you see, treating them like lepers of the spirit. Villagers cross the road to avoid their gaze, children are hushed into silence at their approach, and even the dogs bare teeth in weary growls. Yet, in the hush of this exile, there's a strange peace, a sleepy ASMR whisper in the wind through the trees, the soft patter of rain on the roof lulling you into contemplation of their peculiar fate. The mainstream historical fact woven into this lonely tapestry is the rigid social hierarchy of medieval Europe, where, as Le Goff details, serfs and outcasts formed the base of a pyramid topped by nobility and clergy, with little mobility except through rare acts of valor or divine favor, leaving figures like sin-eaters perpetually marginalized, their services bartered for scraps in a feudal economy that valued land over lives. You feel the grind of it, the endless cycle of foraging for berries in thorny thickets, or begging at back doors for crusts, all while carrying the invisible yoke of absorbed transgressions that weigh heavier than any physical load. Modern aside, it's like being the IT guy for the afterlife. Feverian needs you when things crash, but no one invites you to the company picnic. As midday sun filters through the canopy, you accompany them on a solitary walk along overgrown paths, the crunch of leaves underfoot a rhythmic cadence that matches your slowing breaths. They pause at streams to drink, the cool water splashing against rocks like a gentle reminder of purity they can never fully clean. Quirky tidbit: in some fringe war from Scottish Highlands, sin-eaters were said to whisper confessions to ravens perched on their shoulders, believing the birds could fly the sins away to distant moors, turning feathered companions into unwitting couriers of the damned. Picture that a raven is your therapist, cawing back judgments. You smirk softly, the sarcasm bubbling up. Talk about winning it through emotional baggage. First light joke drifts in. If sin-eaters had social media, their status would be feeling burdened. Literally. You sense the isolation deepening as afternoon wanes, the sin-eater retreating to their hut to carve simple talismans from wood crosses twisted with pagan knots, wards against the very evils they've ingested. The air inside grows thick with the scent of burning sage, a hazy veil that blurs the line between protection and paranoia. They eat sparingly, you notice, as if each meal recalls the feasts of funerals, their appetite dulled by the metaphysical indigestion of others' wrongs. Villagers might leave offerings at the door, a jug of milk, a hunk of cheese, not out of kindness, but superstition, fearing that a starving sin-eater might let sins leak back into the community like poison in the well. You taste the irony, feel the loneliness settle like dust on your skin, a callback to the funeral rites where they were essential yet ephemeral, vanishing once the deed was done. In the fading light you huddle by the fire with them, flames crackling like distant laughter, casting long shadows that dance mockingly on the walls. Their evenings stretch into quiet reflection, perhaps murmuring prayers that blend Christian pleas with older incantations, a personal liturgy born of desperation. Second light joke whispers through the embers. Being a sin-eater is like being a human recycling bin great for the environment of souls, but you end up smelling like everyone else's trash. The sleepy cadence envelops you, senses lengthening as the fire dies down, drawing you into a drowsy haze where time blurs. Scholars debate openly whether this shunned life was a choice driven by poverty or a calling rooted in mystical traditions, with some arguing it echoed hermit saints who sought isolation for spiritual purity, while others see it as enforced ostracism in a society fearful. A contaminational Goff's portrayal of medieval outcasts leaves room for interpretation, a scholarly enigma as enduring as the practice itself. You watch as night fully claims the hut, the sin-eater curling on a straw pallet, their breath sensing with the wind's soft sighs outside. Dreams come fitfully, you imagine, plagued by visions of the dead whose sins now reside within ghostly faces mouthing thanks or accusations. Yet in moments of crisis, the knock comes, a messenger from the village, urgent and hushed, summoning them to another deathbed. You feel the surge of reluctant purpose, the way they're pulled back into the fold only when needed, like a tool dusted off from the shelf. Third light joke tipped those in. Sin-eaters were the medieval equivalent of on-call doctors, except their house calls involved eternal malpractice insurance. Modern aside, in today's gig economy, they'd be rated 5 stars for soul delivery, but 0 for work-life balance. The cycle repeats, you realize, a life of waiting punctuated by acts of quiet heroism or folly, depending on your view. Sensory details linger, the rough texture of wool against skin, the faint tang of wood smoke in the air, the distant toll of a bell marking vespers for those welcomed in church. This isolated existence, essential yet erased, ties back to the origins you delved into, where pagan echoes met Christian fears, forging a role that society couldn't live without but refused to live with. As the moon rises high, bathing everything in silvery calm, you drift further into the narrative's embrace, the ASMR whispers of the forest lulling you toward deeper revelations. You surrender to that silvery calm, the moon's glow filtering through the canopy like a soft veil, guiding you back toward the village where a fresh hush has fallen over the thatch roof. The air carries the faint, acrid tang of torch smoke mingling with the sweeter notes of wildflowers strewn across a newly prepared bier, drawing you into the heart of an eerie ceremony that's about to commence. Mourners gather in a loose circle, their faces pale masked of sorrow and anticipation, lanterns casting elongated shadows that twist like spectral fingers across the ground. You stand among them, invisible yet immersed, your pulse sensing with the low drum of a distant heartbeat, perhaps your own, as the sin-eater emerges from the tree line, cloak billowing gently in the breeze, ready to transform ordinary bread and ale into vessels brimming with the unseen cargo of human frailty. You draw nearer to the bier, the wood creaking softly under the weight of the shrouded form. As the family begins the preparations with hands that tremble like leaves in an autumn gust, the bread, a simple round loaf baked that very morning, is placed reverently on the corpse's chest, right over the heart where sins are said to nest deepest, absorbing the essence of misdeeds through some mystical osmosis that defies the rational mind. You watch the ale being poured into a wooden mug, its foam bubbling like whispered confessions, then passed slowly over the body from head to toe, the liquid sloshing with a rhythmic hush that echoes the ASMR cadence of rain on a windowpane. The sin-eater steps forward, their presence a grounding force amid the ethereal tension, and begins the incantation, a melodic murmur that weaves through the night air, invoking peace for the dead while pledging their own soul as collateral. The ceremony builds in layers, you feel it unfolding around you like a dream sequence, sensory details sharpening, the rough grain of the bread under fingertips, the yeasty aroma rising warm and inviting yet laced with an undercurrent of dread, the cool metal of the mud pressing against palms slick with nervous sweat. They lift the bread first, breaking it with a deliberate crack that resonates like a bone snapping in the quiet, crumbs scattering like forgiven fragments. Each piece is consumed methodically, chewed with eyes closed in concentration, as if savoring the flavors of regret or envy, smoky wrath, cloying lust transferred in that intimate act. You imagine the taste on your own tongue, dry and unyielding, a modern aside slipping in. It's like biting into a protein bar of penance, all fiber and no fun, reminding you how we still ritualize guilt today with juice cleanses and apology texts. A mainstream historical fact anchors this spectral feast. In the medieval worldview chronicled by the Goff, death rituals were deeply intertwined with the cult of saints and relics, where by the 11th century, the elaborate funeral masses involved intercessions to shorten time in purgatory, reflecting a society that commodified salvation through prayers and offerings, much like the sin-eater's symbolic meal. You sense the continuity, how this folk practice mirrored grander ecclesiastical ceremonies, yet stripped to its raw, personal core in rural enclaves. The ale follows, drunk in deep gulps that echo through the gathering, the sin-eater wiping their mouth with a sleeve as the last drops seal the transfer. The mug now empty of liquid but full of ethereal weight. As the rite deepens, you participate vicariously, your breath shallow in the charged atmosphere. The circle of mourners chanting softly in unison, a blend of Latin scraps from church services and older, guttural words from forgotten dialects, quirky tidbit from the fringes, in certain Irish variants whispered in peat bog hamlets. The bread might be laced with a pinch of grave dirt, believed to ground the sins firmly in the eater's body, preventing them from floating back to haunt the living, like adding gravel to your smoothie for extra staying power. You let a gentle sarcastic smile form in the darkness. Talk about a gritty breakfast ritual. No wonder they looked so weighed down. First light joke floats by. If sin-eating involved dessert, it'd be devil's food cake, literally absorbing the naughty bits. The ceremony's climax arrives with a palpable shift, the sin-eater placing hands on the corpse's forehead, murmuring the binding words that echo from earlier tales. With this bread and ale, I take thy sins upon me, that thou mayest rest eternal. You feel the energy pulse, a shiver running through the group like a shared sigh of relief, the air growing heavier with released tension. Modern aside, in our era of viral challenges, this would trend as, but with way more eternal consequences than a bad TikTok dance. The family offers a meager payment, coins clinking into a pouch, perhaps a basket of provisions before dispersing, leaving the sin-eater to linger a moment longer, gazing at the stars as if seeking absolution from the heavens that remain silent. You hover there, the flames of lanterns guttering low, casting a warm glow that softens the edges of the scene into a sleepy haze. Second light joke whispers in, sin ceremonies were like awkward family dinner. Severians got baggage, but only one person ends up with the leftovers. The cadence slows, senses stretching like taffy in the quiet night, lulling you with the rustle of cloaks and the faint scent of extinguished wicks. Scholars debate openly whether these rituals represented a genuine theological alternative to confession or merely a psychological balm for the bereaved, with some positing it as resistance to clerical control, while others view it through a Goff's lens as a symptom of the era's fragmented Peter question that lingers like smoke, and resolved in the annals of history. The rite concludes with the sin-eater turning away, the bier now a place of peace, the vessels of bread and ale transformed and emptied of their burdeners, so the belief holds. You feel the call back to their daily isolation, How these moments of eerie communion punctuate the loneliness, a brief inclusion in the human fold before exile resumes. Third light joke tiptoes through the fading light, absorbing sins via snacks. It's the ultimate cheat day for the soul. Glories don't count, but karma sure does. Sensory immersion deepens. The cool grass underfoot, the distant call of a night bird, the lingering bitterness on the air. This ceremony, both vessel and void, bridges the pagan roots and funeral duties you've witnessed, carrying the narrative's gentle current onward into shadowed expirations yet to come. You trail that departing figure under the moon's watchful eye, the night's hush deepening as the village lights fade into pinpricks behind you, replaced by the vast, echoing chambers of a grand cathedral where stone walls rise like silent guardians of faith. The air shifts to cool, incense-laden drafts whirling around towering arches, carrying the faint echo of Gregorian chants that vibrate through your bones like a distant lullaby. Candles flicker in iron holders, their wax dripping slowly like tears of devotion, illuminating frescoes of Judgment Day where souls ascend or plummet in eternal drama. Here in this sacred space, you plunge into the theological tempests that raged around sin-eating, your mind wandering the corridors of doctrine where folk practices clashed against the unyielding ramparts of church authority, questioning the varied boundaries of salvation. You settle into a wooden pew, its surface worn smooth by countless penitents, feeling the hardness press against you as a reminder of earthly discomforts meant to sharpen spiritual focus. The church, with its vast hierarchy of bishops and popes, preached a monopoly on forgiveness, sins absolved through confession, penance, and the sacraments alone. Yet, out in the misty villages, sin-eaters operated in the shadows, their rituals a quiet rebellion or desperate supplemented. They defy the divine order, or merely fill its cracks. You hear the imagined debates unfolding in scriptoriums, monks bent over parchments, quills scratching furiously as they condemn or curiously note these fringe customs that blurred the lines between orthodoxy and heresy. The mainstream historical fact grounding this clash is the Church's formalization of the 7 sacraments in the 12th century, as Legoff outlines, with extreme unction providing last rites to cleanse the dying soul, reinforcing that only ordained priests could mediate between God and man, leaving no room for lay-eaters to snack on sins like unauthorized interlopers. You envision papal bulls thundering from Rome, decrying superstitions that undermined clerical power, the ink still fresh on decrees that branded such acts as perilous to the faithful. Modern aside, it's like the Vatican issuing a cease and desist to a pop-up soul food truck, claiming trademark on redemption recipes. As you explore deeper, the incense thickens, its smoky tendrils coiling like doubts in your thoughts, leading to tales of inquisitors probing rural hamlets for signs of deviance. Sin-eating, with its bread and ale transfers, echoed the Eucharist in a twisted Maroran substation for the masses, but without the holy imprimatur. You feel the tension, the way villagers whispered defenses. If the priest arrives too late, who else but the eater can ease the passage? The Church saw it as idolatry, a throwback to pagan scapegoating that mocked Christ's ultimate sacrifice. Yet tolerance varied, with some local clergy turning blind eyes in isolated parishes where faith wore a homespun cloak. A quirky tidbit surfaces from the ecclesiastical fringes, and rare accounts from Breton chronicles. Sin-eaters were occasionally consulted by wayward monks themselves, who, burdened by secret lapses, passed symbolic morsels in hidden chapels, believing the eater could launder their vows like spiritual dry cleaning, a forbidden shortcut that risked excommunication if discovered. Imagine thoughtfully men outsourcing their holiness. You allow a gentle sarcastic murmur in your mind. Nothing says pious like delegating your damnation to the village oddball. First light joke eases in. If church debates were sports, sin-eating would be the underdog team, always falling out on technicalities. You wander the cathedral's side chapels, the soft echo of your footsteps a rhythmic ASM or pulse that slows your breathing, inviting drowsy reflections on how these clashes played out in daily sermons. Priests railed from pulpits against devilish deceptions, warning that relying on eaters invited demons to the feast, yet the practice persisted. A testament to the era's layered beliefs where Christianity overlaid but didn't erase older strata. Callbacks to the ceremonies you've witnessed flicker like candle flames, the bread over the corpse, so akin to communion wafers, yet profane in its purpose, absorbing what the host was meant to wash away. The debates intensified during councils. You sense them heating the air like forge fires, theologians arguing in Latin volleys about the nature of sin, transferable like a debt, or indelible without grace. Some saw sin eating as harmless folklore, a placebo for the fearful, others as a gateway to witchcraft, luring souls from the true path. Second light joke whispers through the vaulted ceilings. Theological spats over sin eaters were like arguing if pineapple belongs on pizza, passionate, divisive, and ultimately a matter of taste in damnation. Modern aside, today we'd have TED Talks on hacking heaven, folk fixes for eternal fixes. But back then, it was heresy hearings instead. Scholars debate openly whether sin eating represented a genuine theological challenge to church hegemony or merely a cultural footnote, with interpretations varying from subversive proto-Protestantism to benign syncretism. As Le Goff's analysis of medieval spirituality leaves the door ajar for ongoing discourse among historians poring over fragmented records, you linger in the nave, the organ's low hum vibrating faintly, a sleepy cadence that lengthens your thoughts into languid streams, pondering the human need for assurance beyond official channels. Folk practices like this fill voids left by distant priests or untimely deaths, offering tangible relief in an intangible realm. You could see, sins you could swallow. Third light joke tiptoes in. If sin eaters clashed with doctrine, it was the ultimate food fight, church wafers versus village loaves, battling for soul supremacy. The expiration winds through crypts below where relics gleam in golden casings, symbols of sanctioned intercession that highlighted the unsanctioned nature of eaters' work. You touch the cold stone walls, feeling the weight of centuries of contention, how these debates shape mentalities, fostering a piety both rigid and resilient. Sensory immersion deepens, the faint chill of marble floors, the waxen scent mingling with aged parchment, the distant toll of bells calling to vespers. This clash, echoing the pagan-Christian fusions and isolated lives you've traced, propels the tale forward on whispers of wind through arrow slits, into realms of legend and lore yet to unfold. Those whispers of wind carry you from the cathedral's solemn heights, swirling like autumn leaves through narrow lanes into the flickering glow of a village tavern, where peat fires crackle and mugs clink in subdued rhythm. The air hangs heavy with the aroma of stewed mutton and spilled ale, shadows lengthening as storytellers lean in close, their voices dropping to husky murmurs that tickle your ears like an ASMR secret shared in the dark. You pull up a stool at the edge of the hearth, invisible among the ruddy-faced farmers and weavers, as tales of notorious sin-eaters begin to unfurl, legends of those who shouldered the sins of entire villages, their names etched in folklore like scars on ancient bark, bearing weights that bent their spines and haunted their dreams. You listen intently, the fire's warmth seeping into your bones, as the first story spins out about Richard Munslow, a figure from the Welsh marches whose notoriety echoed through generations. Though whispers place him in the twilight of the medieval era when such customs clung stubbornly to life, they say he wandered from hamlet to hamlet, a tall shadow with a staff carved from you, arriving unbidden at wakes where the air reeked of despair. One tale recounts how he absorbed the sins of a whole plague-stricken village, devouring loaves passed over a dozen corpses in a single night, his belly swelling like a storm cloud while the survivors watched with wide-eyed gratitude. You feel the heaviness in your own gut, imagining the chew of that bread, dense and unforgiving, each bite a catalogue of thefts, adulteries, and unspoken curses that now nested in his soul. The mainstream historical fact threading through these yarns is the devastating impact of the Black Death in the 14th century, as Le Goff vividly describes, which killed up to half of Europe's population and shattered social structures, fostering a surge in death rituals and scapegoating practices as communities grappled with overwhelming guilt and fear of divine retribution. Condians ripe for sin eaters to emerge as folk heroes or villains in the collective memory. You sensed the desperation in the air, the way plagues turned villages into ghost towns, leaving survivors to invent ways to cleanse the miasma of sin that seemed to linger like the disease itself. Modern aside, it's like binge-watching a horror series on pandemics today, but back then, the plot twist was hiring a guy to eat your way out of hell. As the fire pops and sparks dance upward, another whispered story emerged of Marjorie the Grey, a woman sin-eater from the misty Scottish borders, rare in a role often claimed by men who bore the transgressions of feuding clans. Legends paint her trudging through heather fields, cloak heavy with rain, to feasts where bread soaked up the blood oaths and betrayals of warriors fallen in battle. One quirky tidbit from the fringes: she reportedly kept a tally of sins on a necklace of knotted cords, each knot a village's debt, and when it grew too long, she'd bury segments under crossroads to ground the excess evil, lest it overflow, and curse her steps like a medieval version of deleting old emails to free up soul space. You chuckle softly in the dim light, sarcasm whispering, "Ah, the original multitasker, juggling damnation like grocery lists." First light joke drifts in. If Marjorie had a business card, it'd read "Sins eaten while you wait, no refunds on regrets." You lean closer, the tavern's murmurs blending into a lulling cadence that slows your breaths, senses stretching like honey from a calm as the tales weave on. These notorious figures, like the enigmatic wanderer of the marches, said to have consumed the sins of a crop lord whose misdeeds included taxing peasants to starvation, became larger than life in oral histories passed down like heirlooms. The wanderer, with eyes like bottomless wells, would arrive at grand halls disguised as a beggar, only to reveal his purpose when the body lay cold, his feast a spectacle that left nobles quaking. You taste the ale's foam on your lips from an imagined sip, feel the rough wooden table under your palms, sensory details pulling you deeper into the lore where these eaters weren't just absorbers, but judges, their silence a verdict on the community's hidden shames. Callbacks to the rituals you've witnessed flicker in the firelight, bread and ale, now scaled to epic proportions in these stories, where one eater might tackle the collective guilt of harvests failed or wars lost, their bodies twisting under the strain like trees in a gale. Second light joke simmers up. Famous sin-eaters were like celebrity chefs of the underworld, specializing in guilt flam, with a side of eternal indigestion. The sleepy ASMR quality envelops you, the storyteller's voice a gentle drone that eases tension from your shoulders, inviting drowsy immersion in the narrative's glow. Scholars debate openly whether these tales of notorious sin-eaters reflect actual historical individuals or amalgamated myths born from medieval anxieties, with some arguing they symbolize societal catharsis in Lagos's framework of collective mentalities, while others contend they're later embellishments projected backward onto the Middle Ages, a conundrum that fuels endless interpretations in dusty archives and cozy conference rooms. You hear of Elias the Burdened, a sin-eater from English lowlands whose legend claims he took on the sins of an entire abbey after a scandalous prior's death, swallowing not just bread but whispers of embezzlement and forbidden liaisons that left him wandering mad, conversing with crows as if they were the souls he'd freed. The air grows thicker with pipe smoke, its acrid sweetness mingling with the hearth's embers, as the story paints him collapsing under a sacred oak, his final breath releasing a flock of blackbirds that darkened the sky, symbolic, perhaps, of sins taking flight at last. Modern aside, in our world of viral fame, Elias would trend as, with memes about his full plate of problems. The tales cascade onward, each one building on the last, like layers of sediment in an ancient riverbed, revealing how these figures bore not just personal sins but communal ones, famines blamed on greed, floods on wrath, turning them into repositories for a village's conscience. Third light joke bubbles softly. If sin-eaters went on strike, villages would have sin backups worse than a plug drain. Talk about a messy overflow. You relax further, the tavern's warmth a cozy cocoon, the cadence of stories lengthening into yawns that mirror your own, carrying the weight of these legends forward on a current of hushed wonder. These whispered stories, echoing the theological clashes and isolated existences you've explored, paint sin-eaters as tragic titans, their notoriety a double-edged sword that cut deep into the fabric of medieval folklore, propelling you gently toward the burdens they carried in body and spirit. That gentle propulsion draws you away from the tavern's dying embers, the murmurs of legends fading into the cool night air like smoke dissolving into mist, leading you to a solitary figure hunched under a gnarled oak at the forest's edge. The leaves above rustle softly, a natural ASMR symphony that whispers secrets of suffering. As you approach the sin-eater, no, not a hero of tales, but a vessel cracked under the weight of invisible loads. Moonlight filters through branches, casting dappled patterns on their weathered face, etched with lines that tell of tolls far heavier than time alone could carve. You feel the burden settling on your own shoulders, a phantom pressure that makes each breath a little deeper, slower. As you immerse in the spiritual and physical wreckage wrought by a lifetime of devouring others' darkness, you crouch beside them, the damp earth cool against your knees, inhaling the loamy scent of roots and fallen acorns, as their story unfolds in silent vignettes painted by the night's hush. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this descent is the medieval preoccupation with demonic possession and melancholy, as Le Goff explores, where by the 13th century, humoral theories blended with theology to explain afflictions like a seedy, slothful despair of the spirit that plagued those on society's margins, mirroring the sin-eaters' reported torments as symptoms of a world where sin was seen as a tangible, transferable malady. You feel the era's pulse in this, how beliefs in the devil's influence turned personal struggles into battles with infernal forces, leaving eaters to wrestle alone with the demons they'd invited in through bread and ale. Modern aside, it's like downloading someone else's emotional baggage. Suddenly your notifications are all guilt trips and regret reminders, with no uninstall button in sight. As dawn's first light creeps through the foliage, tinting the scene in soft pinks, you witness the physical toll etching deeper, bodies wasting away under the strain, skin paling like parchment left in the sun, joints aching from the metaphorical load that manifests as real pain. They move with labored steps, you observe, hands trembling as they gather herbs for poultices that offer fleeting relief from headaches born of restless nights or stomachs churning with perpetual nausea. The absorbed evils, folk said, curdled the blood, turning vitality to vapor, leaving eaters frail and feverish, their lifespans shortened like candles burned at both ends. You taste the bitterness in your throat from an imagined sip of their herbal brew, feel the roughness of bark against your back as you lean with them against the tree, the sensory weave pulling you into their weary world. A quirky tidbit from the shadowy edges emerges. In some Cornish lore, sin-eaters developed peculiar marks, dark spots on their palms like inky stains from handling too many transgressions, believed to be sin's residue seeping through the skin, which they'd scrub raw with salt water from sacred wells to fade the evidence. Picture that your hands as a ledger of others' ledgers, a living tattoo of turmoil. You let a gentle, sarcastic sigh escape in your thoughts. Nothing says career hazard like getting branded by borrowed bad karma. First light joke eases through the morning mist. If sin-eaters filed workers' comp, it'd be for occupational haunting complete with ghost pains and spectral overtime. You linger under the oak, the bird song rising in a sleepy chorus that lengthens the moments, senses drifting like lazy clouds as you ponder the cumulative crush. Each ritual added layers, you realize, building a pyramid of penance that pressed down relentlessly, pile isolation amplifying physical decline, turning eaters into walking warnings against meddling with the afterlife's accounts. Callbacks to the notorious tales flicker like sunlight through leaves, those titans who bore village-wide burdens now reduced to shells, their heroism hollowed by the very acts that defined them. The cadence slows, your eyelids heavy with the weight of empathy, as the eater's breaths sync with the wind, a rhythmic lull that invites drowsy surrender to the narrative's flow. The consequences ripple outward, you sense, affecting not just body and soul but the very fabric of their fleeting interactions. Villers offering aid from afar, fearful that proximity might transfer the taint back, like a contagion of curses. They age prematurely, hair graying like frost on autumn grass, voices rasping from throats raw with unspoken laments. Second light joke whispers in the breeze, absorbing sins was the medieval diet. Planlows wait fast, but gain eternal baggage. No wonder they looked so light on their feet. Or was that just the hollow bones? Modern aside, in our fitness-obsessed age, we'd market it as Sin Shredder, the ultimate soul workout, but the side effects would tank the reviews. Scholars debate openly whether these tolls were psychosomatic echoes of societal stigma or genuine metaphysical afflictions rooted in the era's animistic undercurrents, with interpretations ranging from the Goth's view of medieval bodies as battlegrounds for spiritual wars to skeptical dismissals as exaggerated folklore, a puzzle that invites contemplation over steaming mugs in quiet libraries, unresolved like the eater's unrest. You watch as midday sun climbs higher, warming the glade yet failing to thaw the chill in their core, the physical frailties compounding with spiritual voids to create a life of quiet erosion. Limbs weaken, appetites wane, and solitude becomes both curse and comfort, a shield against the world's judgments. Third light joke tiptoes through the dappled light. If sin eaters had therapy, it'd be group sessions with ghosts. Hi, I'm Bob, and I eat your envy. Past the tissues, the sensory tapestry enriches, the soft crunch of acorns underfoot, the faint rustle of wildlife, the earthy tang of moss in the air. This heavy burden, tying back to the rituals and debates you've navigated, transforms the eater from participant to prisoner. Their suffering's a testament to the human cost of playing intermediary with the divine, gently ushering the tale onward into varied landscapes where such fates adapted and endured. Those varied landscapes unfold before you like a tapestry unrolling in the soft glow of twilight, the forest's edge giving way to rolling hills and distant spires as you embark on a journey across medieval Europe, your footsteps light on paths worn by pilgrims and traders alike. The air shifts with each new horizon, crisp mountain breezes in the Alps, salty sea mists along the coasts, the earthy richness of river valleys, each region adapting the sin-eating practice to its own cultural soil, like vines twisting to fit the trellis of local beliefs and terrains. You feel the earth's pulse beneath your soles, a rhythmic cadence that mirrors the heartbeat of diverse peoples bound by a common thread of mortality, their customs evolving in isolation yet echoing the core ritual you've come to know so intimately. You begin your trek in the misty highlands of Wales, where the practice took root deepest, the rugged terrain of slate quarries and sheep-dotted moors shaping a version both stark and intimate. Here sin-eaters roamed as solitary wanderers, summoned to stone cottages where the wind howled through cracks like mournful spirits. Their feast, simple affairs of barrel or lavender bread passed over the dead amid chants that blended Welsh folklore with faint Christian echoes. You taste the herbal tang on the breeze, feel the damp wool of cloaks clinging to your skin, as families in these remote valleys relied on ears more than distant priests. The landscape's isolation fostering a self-reliant piety that turned sin absorption into a communal safeguard against wandering ghosts. Modern aside, it's like regional recipes for soul food. Wells went heavy on the herbs, probably to mask the flavor of all that imported regret. Venturing eastward into the English borderlands, the flat meadows and hedgerow fields softened the rite, adapting it to a more agrarian rhythm where harvest festivals intertwined with funeral customs. Sin-eaters here might incorporate local ales brewed from barley fields, the frothy mugs passed over corpses laid in barns amid stacks of hay, the scent of fermenting grains mingling with incense from makeshift altars. You hear the lowing of cattle in the distance, feel the sun-warmed earth underfoot, as these variations emphasized abundance. Bread loaves larger, symbolizing the land's fertility, to swallow sins tied to failed crops or land disputes. The practice blended seamlessly with maypole dances and solstice fires, a callback to the pagan roots you delved into earlier, where nature's cycles dictated the flow of spiritual cleansing. The mainstream historical fact illuminating these adaptations is the cultural fragmentation of medieval Europe following the Carolingian Empire's decline in the 9th century, as Le Goff recounts, leading to localized customs in a continent divided by languages, dialects, and feudal loyalty, allowing folk practices like sin-eating to morph distinctly in regions from the British Isles to the fringes of the Holy Roman Empire. You sense the diversity in the air, how borders drawn by rivers or mountains became barriers that nurtured unique expressions of the same fear, and absolved sins tainting the soil or seas that sustained life. Crossing into the Scottish lowlands, where lochs gleam like mirrors under brooding skies, you discover a fiercer variant shaped by clan rivalries and harsh winters. Sin-eaters in these parts, often kin to the deceased in extended families, consume the wait cakes dusted with heather pollen. The ritual performed by peat fires that cast glowing embers like watchful eyes. You feel the chill seeping through your tartan wrap, hear the bagpipes' distant wail echoing funeral dirges, as the practice here included invocations to ancestral spirits, adapting to a landscape where blood feuds amplified the sins to be absorbed murders, and betrayals swallowed whole to prevent clan curses rippling through generations. A quirky tidbit from the Highland fringes, eaters sometimes buried and eaten crumbs at crossroads haunted by fairies, believing the wee folk would nibble the remnants, sharing the burden in a whimsical pact that lightened the load but risked fey mischief in return, like outsourcing to mythical tempts with a side of enchantment. You smile faintly in the misty veil, sarcasm murmuring, "Talk about a fairy tale ending. Who knew pixies had an appetite for petty thefts?" Further south, in the vine-clad hills of France, the custom softened under the influence of troubadour romances and monastic vineyards, where sin-eaters rare but revered incorporated wine instead of ale. The ruby liquid passed over bodies in candlelit chapels, its bouquet evoking the region's lush terroir. You wander through sun-dappled orchards, the sweet rot of fallen fruit underfoot, as rituals here emphasized redemption through beauty, bread scented with rosemary to symbolize remembrance. Adapting to a culture where courtly love's sins of passion demanded a more poetic purging. The sleepy ASMR cadence of rustling vines lulls you senses lengthening like shadows at dusk, drawing you into a drowsy appreciation of how landscapes flavored the feast, mountainous isolation breeding austerity, fertile plains inviting elaboration. Venturing into the Germanic forests of the Rhine Valley, dense with ancient oaks and folklore of elves, you encounter adaptations laced with Teutonic mysticism, sin-eaters using rye bread etched with runes, the symbols believed to bind sins tighter within, performed in clearings where moonlight pierced the canopy like silver needles. You feel the bark's rough texture against your palms, hear wolves howling in the distance, as these variations tied sins to the land's mythical beasts, eaters sometimes howling back to summon strength against the absorbed evils. First light joke drifts through the fog. If sin-eating went international, the German version would be like a pretzel twist, knotted, hearty, and guaranteed to tie your soul in loops. Eastward to the Slavic steppes, vast and windswept, the practice morphed into communal affairs where multiple eaters shared the load for noble death. Bread divided like portions of inheritance amid tents of nomadic herders. You taste the steppes' wild honey in the air, feel the grass whispering against your legs, a callback to the burdens you felt, now distributed to prevent any one soul from shattering under the weight. Second light joke whispers on the wind. Regional sin-eating was the original fusion cuisine, Welsh herbs meet French wine, but nobody wanted the Scottish haggis of horrors. Scholars debate openly whether these variations stemmed from migratory influences like Viking incursions or Celtic diasporas, as Le Goff's tapestry of medieval exchanges suggests, or if they arose independently from universal human anxieties about death, A question that sparks lively discourse in symposiums tracing the threads of cultural diffusion across the continent. Continuing to the Iberian coasts, sun-baked and Moorish-inflected, sin-eating blended with Islamic echoes in reconquered lands, using spiced flatbreads and olive oil drizzles. Rituals under starry skies, where the seas roar drowned out incantations. You feel the sand shifting beneath you, the salt spray on your lips, as adaptations here focused on maritime since lost sailors' transgressions swallowed to calm stormy spirits. Third light joke tiptoes in. If landscapes shaped sin-eating, the coastal ones were beach bodies slain, tanned, and full of washed-up regrets. Modern aside, today we'd have apps mapping sin-eater near me with regional filters, but back then it was word of mouth across borders. These travels reveal a mosaic of modifications, each culture imprinting its essence on the core act, from alpine austerity to Mediterranean warmth. Tying back to the isolations and ceremonies you've traversed, the narrative's gentle current carries you onward, the horizons blending into a hazy dreamscape where echoes of these adaptations linger like fading footprints in the sand. Those fading footprints in the sand blur into the cobblestone streets of a bustling medieval town, where the clamor of market stalls and the clang of church bells herald a shifting tide. The once whispered reliance on sin-eaters giving way to stern edicts from pulpits high above. You meander through the throng, the air thick with the spice of traded wares and the acrid bite of blacksmith forges, as you observe the growing opposition from the church. Its influence swelling like a river after spring rains, washing away the fringes of folk practices that dared to encroach on sacred ground. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows that stretch like accusatory fingers toward the outskirts where sin-eaters once lingered, now pushed further into obscurity by the inexorable march of orthodoxy and enlightenment. You pause at the steps of a grand abbey, its stone facade looming imposingly, feeling the cool draft from arched doorways that seem to exhale centuries of doctrine. Priests in flowing robes ascend the pulpit during Mass, their voices booming with authority, decrying the heathen remnants that undermine the sacraments and eating branded as superstition at best, heresy at worst, a relic of darker times that must be purged for the soul's true salvation. You hear the congregation murmur in uneasy agreement, the fear of excommunication a sharper spur than any ghostly haunting, as pamphlets and decrees circulate like leaves in the wind, warning against those who usurp the role of Christ by absorbing sins through mere mortal means. The opposition builds gradually, starting in urban centers where clerical oversight tightens, spreading to rural hamlets via traveling inquisitors who root out deviations with the zeal of gardeners weeding a holy plot. The mainstream historical fact undergirding this suppression is the Council of Trent in the mid-16th century, which, as Le Goff contextualizes in the waning Middle Ages, reaffirmed the Church's exclusive authority over sacraments and penance, standardizing rituals across Europe and marginalizing local customs in a bid to counter the rising Protestant Reformation, effectively dooming hybrid practices like sin-eating too. The shadows of history. You feel the era's tension in the air, the way reformist winds from the north fan Catholic resolve, turning inward scrutiny on internal corruptions that echoed pagan holdovers. The Church's net cast wide to ensnare and extinguish. As you wander the abbey grounds, the scent of blooming cloister gardens, roses, and lavender wafting gently, you witness the decline in subtle shifts, fewer summons for eaters at funerals, their roles usurped by increased confessions and indulgences sold like market goods, the faithful opting for papal promises over bread-born bargains. The practice fades into obscurity, retreating to the most remote corners, where mountains shield secrets or islands harbor holdouts. But even there, the pressure mounts, villagers whispering of eaters vanishing overnight, perhaps fleeing or reformed through coarse baptisms that wash away their old ways. Modern aside, it's like the Church launching a rebrand, swapping out the quirky local apps for their premium, ad-free version of Salvatono user mods allowed, or risk getting banned from the Afterlife server. You sense the gradual fade, a slow dimming of lantern light, as opposition grows through sermons that paint sin-eaters as agents of Satan, their feats dismissed as illusions that endanger souls rather than save them. A quirky tidbit from the suppression's fringes. In some defiant Welsh enclaves, sin-eaters reportedly disguise their rituals as charity feasts for the poor, hiding the corpse past breading communal stews shared at wakes, allowing the eater to absorb sins incognito amid the broth until sharp-nosed clerics caught the whiff of heresy in the soup, banning such gatherings outright. Imagine not a sins to simmering away, who knew damnation could come with carrots and a hint of bay leaf. You let a gentle sarcastic murmur rise in your mind, talk about spicing up potluck purgatory, one wrong ladle, and you're toast. First light joke drifts in. When the church cracked down, sin-eaters went underground legally, hiding in cellars like bootleg brewers. But their brew was Eternal Regret IPA, and it had a killer hangover. The decline accelerates as you traverse a fog-shrouded moor, the mist curling like ghostly fingers around ancient standing stones, where one's vital customs wither under the church's gaze. Eaters, now hunted like foxes, scatter or renounce, their knowledge passed in hushed fragments to apprentices who dare not practice openly, the tradition fracturing into mere folklore told by firesides to wide-eyed children. You feel the loss in the wind sigh, the way communities trade tangible rituals for abstract assurances, the void filled by rosaries and relics that promise cleaner paths to paradise. Callbacks to the regional variations you've traveled flicker in the haze, the spiced Iberian breads or runic Germanic loaves now relics of a bygone blend, suppressed uniformly as the church's reach unifies doctrine across borders. Opposition peaks in edicts from Rome. You observe papal bulls thundering against abominable usages that mock the confessional, driving the practice underground or into extinction in more accessible lands. The sleepy ASMR whisper of pages turning in monastic libraries accompanies this fade, sentences lengthening like evening shadows as scholars record the last gasps, preserving echoes in tones that gather dust. Second light joke whispers through the fog. Suppressing sin-eaters was like canceling a hit show mid-season. Fans rioted quietly. But the network the Vatican insisted on purer programming with fewer plot twists. Scholars debate openly whether the decline stemmed primarily from ecclesiastical pressure or broader societal shifts toward rationalism and urbanization. As Le Goff's examination of late medieval transition suggests, with some arguing it was the Reformation's ripple effects that accelerated the fade, while others posit internal erosion from within folk communities themselves, a layered enigma that invites pondering over flickering candlelight in academic halls. You near the moor's edge, the sun setting in a blaze of crimson that bathes everything in a warm, waning glow, the suppression's legacy evident in abandoned huts where eaters once dwelled, now overgrown with ivy like nature reclaiming its own. The physical tolls you felt on those bearers now extend to the practice itself, starved of patronage and hounded into hiding. Its gradual obscurity a testament to power's ability to rewrite the rules of redemption. Third light joke tiptoes in the twilight. If sin-eating got cancelled, it was the ultimate ghosting. Church said not today, Satan, and poof, no more snack time for souls. Modern aside, in our era of cancel culture, sin-eaters would trend as problematic influencers, their feeds full of toxic takes from the dead. But back then, it was straight to the historical recycle bin. The fade continues inexorably. You sense it in the quieting villages where funerals standardize under clerical eyes, the eerie ceremonies replaced by solemn masses, the eater's shadows lengthening into myth, sensory details linger, the faint echo of chants lost to the wind, the earthy dampness of untrodden paths, the distant peal of bells enforcing uniformity. This suppression, building on the theological clashes and burdensome consequences you've witnessed, marks the twilight of a tradition, its obscurity a veil drawn over centuries of desperate ingenuity, gently guiding the narrative toward reflections on what echoes remain in the modern mist. Those modern mists part like curtains in a gentle breeze, revealing the familiar glow of streetlights and the hum of distant traffic in your own time, where the echoes of sin-eating linger subtly in the rituals we perform today, whispering reminders of how medieval fears of mortality still shape our views on death and redemption. You stroll through a contemporary cemetery at dusk, the air soft with the scent of fresh-cut grass and wilting bouquets, gravestones etched with epitaphs that speak of lives well lived or regrets unspoken. As you ponder the enduring impact of those ancient absorbers whose burdens bridged the gap between sin and serenity, the practice may have faded into the annals of history, suppressed and obscured, but its spirit persists in the ways we seek to unburden the deadened our Silvestro ceremonies that blend the sacred with the sentimental, turning funerals into feasts of memory where food and stories serve as vessels for what words can't convey. You pause by a grave adorned with candles flickering like hesitant stars, their wax pooling slowly, and reflect on how today's wakes often feature shared meals. Plates passed around as tales of the departed flow freely, and knowingly echoing the bread and ale that once carried sins away. In Irish-American communities, for instance, the tradition of funeral potatoes or communal potlucks mirrors the symbolic feasts of old, where nourishment comforts the living while honoring the dead, a subtle nod to absorbing collective grief if not literal transgressions. You feel the warmth of the imagined gatherings, the clink of forks on plates, the aroma of casseroles bubbling with cheese and nostalgia, sensory threads that tie back to the eerie ceremonies you've witnessed, now sanitized and secularized in a world that prefers therapy over theology. The mainstream historical fact threading this legacy is the evolution of death customs post-Reformation, as Le Goff traces in the transition from medieval to early modern Europe, where the Protestant emphasis on personal faith diminished intermediary rituals. Yet folk elements like sin-eating influenced lingering practices, such as telling the bees of a death or leaving food for the departed, shaping modern Western funerary traditions that prioritize emotional closure over spiritual scavenging. You sense the continuity, how the fear of unresolved sins morphed into our contemporary obsessions with legacy and forgiveness, manifesting in eulogies that absolve the dead through rose-tinted recollections, or in therapy sessions where we unpack inherited traumas like modern-day eaters digesting familial faults. Venturing deeper into the twilight paths where shadows lengthen and blend with the encroaching night, you uncover quirky tidbits of persistence. In some rural Appalachian enclaves, descendants of Welsh immigrants still whisper of ghost bread loaves left on windowsills for wandering spirits, a fringe holdover believed to draw out lingering elves from the home, preventing bad luck much like the sin-eater's meal once did. Imagine that a spectral snack bar open all hours who knew ectoplasm paired so well with sourdough. You allow a soft, sarcastic smile to form in the dim light. Talk about leaving crumbs for the afterlife. It's the ultimate no-contact delivery service for damnation. First light joke eases through the evening hush. If sin-eating survived as a startup today, it'd be Uber Eats for eternity delivering peace, one phantom bite at a time. With a 5-star rating for soul satisfaction, you sit on a weathered bench, the wood cool and splintered under your palms, gazing at the horizon where city lights twinkle like distant promises, pondering how these echoes influence our views on mortality. Death no longer a fiery purgatory, but a psychological puzzle, yet still haunted by the need to cleanse the narrative of a life. Modern asides flicker like fireflies. In our age of true crime podcasts and ancestry apps, we devour stories of the past's misdeeds, absorbing them vicariously as entertainment, a digital sin-eating that lets us judge without the personal cost. The sleepy ASMR cadence of crickets chirping envelops you, senses drifting longer like the fading day, inviting a drowsy meditation on how literature and film perpetuate the characters like the burdened anti-hero in ghost stories, carrying others' weights in a nod to those medieval outcasts. These persistences manifest in unexpected places. You muse, From Day of the Dead altars laden with food for spirits in Mexico, blending indigenous and Catholic elements much like the pagan Christian fusion of older psychological concepts, like transgenerational trauma, where therapists help eat the sins of ancestors through talk, freeing descendants from inherited shadows. Callbacks to the regional variations and burdensome tolls you've explored shimmer in the gloaming, the spiced breads of Iberia echoing in pan de muerto, the isolated lives reflected in our solitary grief counselors, who shoulder emotional loads for a fee. Second light joke whispers on the breeze, today's legacy of sin eating. It's in every confessional reality TV episode of spilling sins for ratings, with the audience as the eater, munching on drama from the couch. Scholars debate openly whether these modern echoes represent direct descendants of medieval sin-eating or convergent evolutions born from universal human needs to ritualize death, with interpretations varying from the Goss framework of persistent mentalities in evolving societies to anthropological views that see them as archetypal scapegoating mechanisms, recycled across erosa discourse that meanders through journals and lectures, leaving room for wonder in the interplay of history and psyche. You rise slowly, the cemetery gates creaking softly as you exit into the starlit streets, reflecting on the profound impact sin-eating reminds us that mortality's sting lies not just in loss, but in the unfinished business we leave behind, urging a kinder reckoning with our flaws in an age of self-help and second chances. Third light joke tiptoes in the quiet. If sin-eater's legacy isn't therapy, then shrinks are the new brush urging by the hour to nibble on your neuroses. No bread required, just a comfy couch and Kleenex. Sensory immersion deepens. The faint rustle of leaves, the cool night air brushing your skin, the distant hum of life affirming that while practices fade, the quest for peace endures. This reflection, weaving through the suppressions and adaptations you've traced, closes the circle on a haunting heritage. Its impact a soft undercurrent in how we face the end, gently fading into the calm of contemporary contemplation. As the stars twinkle overhead like gentle guardians watching over your thoughts, you feel the weight of centuries lifting softly from your shoulders, the tales of sin-eaters dissolving into a warm, enveloping mist that soothes the edges of your mind. Let the imagery of bread and ale, of shadowed figures and ancient fears, fade slowly into the background, replaced by the quiet assurance that in understanding the past, we find peace in the present, no burdens too heavy to release. With a deep, steady breath, the wind whispers lullabies through the trees, carrying away any lingering chills, inviting your eyelids to grow heavier, your breaths to deepen and slow, as the world's hustle quiets to a distant hum, reassuring you that sleep awaits like an old friend, ready to cradle you in dreams untroubled by echoes of yesteryear. Rest now, dear listener, in the soft embrace of night, where sins and stories alike find their gentle repose, fading into serenity's whisper.